Hello students and welcome to the final video. We're going to combine two chapters here to close out the semester, and it's all going to be about research. So chapter 13 is finding and evaluating sources. This semester I did not really require you to do a research paper of some kind, but when you take, say, 1301, you will end up needing to write some kind of research paper using some sort of format, such as MLA, which is what we've been using in this class, or APA, or Chicago, whatever your professor may want. It's important to learn what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in these courses as general rules. Things have come a long way since, say, I was in school, where Wikipedia is something that, well, we'll talk about, but it used to be kind of forbidden. And you can more freely use sources, I'll put it that way, than you used to could. But you should still try to use nice, reputable sources like databases as much as possible. So we're going to learn today where to find information, how to use sources, and how to use them ethically. And what I mean by ethically is that you are not just stealing the information or trying to write off those ideas as your own. You're using them to augment or provide support for your own ideas. Ideally, when you're using research, you are finding support for whatever your claims are. So, I know that especially if you live right around this satellite campus, that Kingwood, which is probably the next closest campus to you, maybe it's North Harris, one of those campuses, they are going to have much nicer libraries than the East Aldine Center. So the East Aldine Center just really does not have a full-on library because we're like a satellite campus. That being said, you have full access to any Lone Star campus library. And if you end up going to a four-year institution like University of Houston, as an example, they have massive libraries as well. And that honestly is your most valuable resource for not just research in terms of finding the sources, but also getting supports. That the librarians there are trained specifically to support students in using research. Additionally, the internet puts a lot of this at your fingertips, as we will see, but you probably already know. But books and journals are legitimate and oftentimes the best sources out there. That the best research papers end up published in journals, and books are a summation of a lot of work or research that's out there. It's where people have compiled the best ideas and have maybe made an authority source on some sort of material. So let's talk about the library. The libraries themselves are going to have catalogs and ways to search. And it's a good idea to really go in kind of with notes ahead of time of what you're going to be looking for. Library and database search engines have come a long way. That a long time ago, they were different than the search engine, like if you just went to Google, that you had to use keywords in a different way. You couldn't just use like a sentence or something like that. But things have changed and evolved, and so they're much more accessible to a general student. But librarians at these institutions are there to help you, the students. And so I'm going to be showing you like what is there and what you should be gravitating towards. but the librarians are the ones who can help support you at the physical library in finding something. You know, if you go up and you say, hey, I'm researching this thing, I want to know if you have any articles or topics or journals or books over this particular source, a librarian should be able to help you or give you advice. They'll also be able to support you with the electronic databases, such as getting access to them. We have, as Lone Star, access to some pretty powerful ones, like JSTOR. And within those, it allows you access to things like newspapers, magazines, and journals that you would otherwise maybe not have access to. You might be able to see if, like, you searched on Google a title, but not the contents of the source. So just because you find a source, like maybe the librarian helps you and says, oh, hey, there's this book, it may not end up being useful to you. And so your next step after just finding a source is, well, is this source useful? And so you should just kind of go down a checklist of questions to yourself. And so you know that maybe if it is useful, how you're going to end up using it even. So some questions to kind of act as a filter would be, okay, so what is the point of the source in the first place? What's the purpose of it? And who is the audience for that? Is it for the general public, or is it like a technical journal for, say, physicians? That may change how you're able to use it. Who's the author? Are they a credible source that people cite? Or are they someone new? Are they controversial? Who published it? Is this a journal that's known to be reputable? Or was it just published on some random website? Is it a publisher that has some sort of editorial bias? And by that, what I mean is maybe it's a science journal and you're researching about climate change, and that science journal only publishes particular articles that aid or support their view on climate change, whatever that may be. Well, I would say that there is a bias there in what they accept and publish, rather than just saying, okay, give me the data and the conclusions on that. And knowing that bias exists, what might you need to know to be able to use the source well? Another thing to really look at, and once you figure this out, it actually helps your research a lot, but it's kind of something that you wouldn't normally think about the first time you're doing research, is that for a lot of these, you're not getting isolated articles. So when people make these journals, for example, even if they're doing research, they are standing on the shoulders of giants. And what I mean by that is they didn't just wake up one day and say, okay, I'm going to give this experiment or research this topic. To be able to do that research, they're coming in with all this prior knowledge. And unless something is common knowledge that everyone knows it, they're going to be citing their sources too. They're going to be saying, okay, based on this prior experiment, we're now going to take that data and that conclusion and take it a step further. And so they're going to also cite sources. If you go and you look at those sources, you may find something juicy, whether that's more sources that you can derive information from and use yourself, or maybe you find out that the sources that the experiment or the journal or whatever it is that you're researching is using are bad. And then you have to say, oh, this person went into this not with a free mind, that they were cherry picking. They were looking for specific sources that only supported what they wanted to hear. And thus, this probably isn't a good source to use. Another thing to look at is when the research happened. So for example, I'm a teacher, right? I'm a professor. If I have a question that I want to do research on, like for example, is homework helpful or harmful to a student holistically? So that means like not necessarily in just one area, but as a whole over the course of their entire educational career. Is homework worth giving to, say, like a K-12 student? I am going to probably find very different data and conclusions from an article published in the 1950s to an article published in 2019. I need to keep that in mind and what has changed since then. That does not mean I can't use old articles, but it just means I need to be sure that I am going in with the knowledge that certain things are different. Websites are the easiest thing to find, right? If we just Google it and we see what's out there. But before you just use anything, you have to evaluate the website. Who made it? Is there an organization behind it? For example, a lot of health-related articles are either sponsored by like a pharmaceutical company, or they may be sponsored by a company that wants to sell you supplements. Okay, well, that changes how we feel about that source, right? There's also a lot of BS out there on the internet, as we all know. So can you verify it? Does the site have errors? Do the links work? Is it up to date? Is it just copied and pasted for somewhere else? Do they cite their sources, or are they just saying things as if it were truth? Google Scholar can help you find sources, specifically non-scholarly ones and free ones, but it doesn't have everything in there. It also tends to slant towards some disciplines more than others. It has no basis on quality, so some of the stuff in there is going to be junk, right? That it's giving you everything. And also, some links will be to databases where Google Scholar does not give you access to it. You have to find access in some other way, and your first step should really be seeing if the college library gives you free access in the first place. I think Google Scholar is an excellent thing to use, but I would not use it first. I would always go to your college provided databases first. They are robust, and when you exhaust them, then start using websites and Google Scholar and other things. So, how do you get to those databases? Well, if you go through Lone Star, you will find an account. Like I said before, librarians can help you. And for English in particular, JSTOR is a great resource. Okay, so if you go to the Lone Star College website and you get all logged in and everything, there are links to research databases, and there's a chat there that can help you. There's also phone numbers to all of the main campus libraries. If you're looking for a particular aspect or book or something like that, you can reserve or check them out. They have ways to help you with citations. They have information about plagiarism. They have research guides keyed into each Lone Star campus. Remember that we are under Lone Star Kingwood, so that would be the one that you would reference even if you are part of the East Aldine Center, we report to Kingwood. And if you have any question about that, ask your professor and ask the librarian. Especially if you're on the fence about a resource, like maybe a website, it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst thing that happens is the instructor says no, and you have to go back to the drawing board and search again. But if you don't ask and then use it, you have a chance that the professor is going to ding you for that, so don't do it. Wikipedia is a great place to get general information. And it has a bunch of sources at the bottom that you can go into. You see like all of these blue things will take you to links at the bottom. All of these little things right here are the sources. And see, here they are down at the bottom. You can click all of these and they either take you to an outside website, or like there are research articles or books, and those are places that can maybe lead you to sources. But here's the thing. Anyone can edit Wikipedia entries. So you can't take them as truth. And sometimes these are old or broken or go to things that are not reliable. There's nothing wrong with using Wikipedia as a starting place, but do not depend on it for research, especially when you have access to free articles through the library. If you graduate college and you no longer have that access and you need to do some research, Wikipedia becomes a much stronger tool. But you're not in that situation, so I would recommend not to use it. So let's say that you found some sources. How do you use them in your writing? Well, probably the best way is to write down everything about the source that you can, to summarize the source in your own words, and then cite it. You always show where it's coming from. A direct quote is not a bad idea either. But remember, these are things to support your conclusions. You're not finding sources to give conclusions to us. If I wanted that, I would just read the source in the first place. Anything that's not yours, whether it's paraphrased or quoted, has to be cited. Okay, paraphrasing is a way to condense things so you don't have to use a really, really long quote. So as an example, you have this paragraph here. Always pay close attention to the stitching on a Kate Spade bag. The logo is stitched perfectly straight. It's not a sticker. Most designers stitch a simple label to the inside of their purses. On Chanel bags, however, the interior label is usually stamped and tends to match the color of the exterior. Studying the material the bag is made from, a real Chanel multi-pocket bag, for example, is constructed from lambskin leather, not vinyl. Your paraphrasing is telling us the ideas of that without just giving it all to us again. So what was the main idea? It's often possible to tell a fake designer handbag from a genuine one by looking at the details. That was what this was all about. Then you could give a short example. Items such as logos should not be crooked, and you should look for distinctive features. Counterfeiters are not going to use exactly the same everything. They just get close enough to fool people. And notice this at the end where it says Cox. That is a citation. So that's saying, hey, I got this from here. Notice Joni Cox is the author's name, so I am citing it. This is acceptable. I can use all this because I have cited it. Now, I should say that if this is all you turned in was a paraphrase as your paper, you're doing something wrong. There should have been something up above here that is really making a claim. And then this is our supporting evidence, and then we would explain it. The paraphrase doesn't just change one word or two words. I am reading something and I'm putting it away off to the side where I can't see it. And then I am going to take the time to summarize it in my own words in a shorter way. Okay? It should not be word for word. You're presenting the ideas. You're summarizing. So, remember, our example before took this long thing and we could break it down into this much smaller summary. Buyers who want to identify fake handbags should check details such as the way the label is sewn and the material the item is made from. And notice, this is a summary. I am still citing. This was their own words. Still citing. You have to provide a citation. Always document what you quote, but anything that's not yours, you need to cite. Okay, so quoting. Quoting is what I prefer doing. Now, you cannot, or should not rather, plop a quote in. What's quote plopping? Quote plopping is where you have a paragraph, you have your own words like, oh, handbags are often counterfeited. Okay, those are my own words, period. And then I start my quotation marks and I just put all of this in quotes and slap it in there. That is a plopped quote. I don't need a full sentence as a quotation mark, okay? I do not need that. Notice all of these examples only use parts of the sentence. Can you use a full sentence? Yes, you can in a quote, but you shouldn't need to. A few words here or there to pull the idea that you wanted is what you need. A non-plopped quote is going to have some sort of additional words to introduce where this is coming from and possibly why it's important, or to make it read more clear. You're going to name the source or the author, and you're still going to cite it too. But quotes are a good way of ensuring that you don't accidentally have someone think that you're plagiarizing when you don't want to. Quotation marks make it clear that, hey, these are not my words. Now, the downside is that they're harder to use and make it sound natural. You really have to put some work into it. But that's okay. Instead of saying the author says or the source says, there are some words here like admits, concludes, explains, notes that really jazz up your writing, but also these are more specific and exact. If the quotation is drawing a conclusion, then I should say concludes or points out. If we are not really 100% behind them, maybe it's what they believe instead of what they're stating, which sounds more like a fact. Synthesis is what you should be going towards. And that's what I was saying is the opposite of a plopped quote. So it's where you have some paraphrase in parts of quotes. Notice they're still cited, but they weave it together in a way to not sound awkward. It takes practice doing this. It takes practice. Also, you see that there are 3 quotes used here, and yet they are seamless in how they all come together. So this makes it seem like that this particular author really knows their stuff and is making a new point, not just being redundant in what the sources are saying. How can you use sources ethically? And what I mean by ethically is that no one can accuse you of trying to be misleading or trying to pass off something as your own. You document anything that's not yours. You always cite anything that is not yours. Any thought, any idea, any information, any quotation, anything. And then no one can ever accuse you of plagiarizing. Okay, plagiarism is not acceptable. It can be the death of a political campaign, for example. So did you know that Joe Biden, years and years ago, tried to run for president? This was way before he was vice president for Barack Obama. Many, many years before. And what knocked him out of the race was that he got dinged for plagiarism on one of his campaign speeches. That was enough to do him in for an entire presidential campaign. Be careful. These things will come back to haunt you. Plagiarism is theft. People don't like their ideas being stolen. I'm sure that you've had a time in your life where you said something to someone. Maybe you made a joke, maybe it was a comment, and then you hear them repeat it later and take credit for it. And it makes you angry. Well, it's the same thing here. And in college or school, we're wanting to assess your ideas, not the source's ideas. It pretty much will get you into big, big trouble. And what is plagiarism? Not using proper citations. Presenting anything that was from someone else as your own. Buying and selling any sort of materials and trying to pass off as your own. And then there's this weird one that's called self-plagiarism that makes not that much sense to people the first time they hear it, which is that let's say that you're taking 2 classes and they have a similar assignment, and so you submit the same paper for both. That can be considered self-plagiarism. So why would that be plagiarism if you can't steal from yourself, right? So it's a different idea behind that, is that you're not stealing someone else's work in that case. It's that think of it almost like paying someone to do the work for you. You're taking credit for someone else, in this case it's still you, doing the assignments, right? You're trying to pass off some work that wasn't you doing an assignment from scratch as you doing an assignment from scratch. This actually comes up occasionally in the academic field as well, that you're trying to double dip and get credit for more than one thing. You can quote yourself and quote the prior body of work if it were published, but you can't just pass off something entirely as your own. Something that needs to be put in here that it is in here. It says by any individual group other than the student, as though the work is the student's own. Okay, AI should fall under that, but AI is its own thing. And if you try to pass off AI as your own, that is plagiarism. And yes, this includes running your work through something that rephrases your words for you, like some sort of thesaurus or a Quillbot or something like that. If you're just saying, oh, it's there to fix my grammar, it's still plagiarism. Still plagiarism. So can you use those tools? Absolutely, you can use those tools. But then you have to manually go through, oh, what did it change? Oh, why did it change it? Oh, I need a comma here. Okay, let me refine. Instead of assuming that what it wrote was, one, correct, because oftentimes AI will make mistakes or make something nonsensical, but 2, is reflective of your ideas. It will change more than you think. Do not do it. What should you cite or document? Anything that's not yours. And yes, students accidentally commit plagiarism all the time, but for professors, I had a student this semester, more than one, accidentally commit plagiarism. They showed me evidence that it was unintentional. They were able to show me through like document history that they did the work, blood, sweat, and tears into the assignments. I then could work with them. But had they not been able to show me any evidence, it would have been classified as cheating. Once again, anything that's not yours, cite it. Anything that isn't yours, put it in quotation marks. Distinguish your ideas from the source ideas. To review, you should always go through your sources and try to figure out what's good about them or relevant about them. Take that information and mold it into the best way to support your ideas in your paper. Cite your sources. And if you don't document it, it's plagiarism. So, our final chapter is all about documenting these sources in MLA style. I'm going to kind of go through this semi-quickly, and we'll also be talking about APA, because a lot of this is just covered under other places in a better way. So like Purdue OWL is a great resource for MLA citations. There are a lot of websites out there that will help you cite. Google Docs will help you cite. Microsoft Word will help you cite. And there are Citation Machine will help you cite. There's a bunch out there. What is citing? It's telling us where you got the stuff from. MLA requires in-text citations. That's the stuff we were looking at last chapter that was in parentheses. It also wants you to briefly say where it was from. And then it needs to be attached to nearby wherever you're using it. So you're not putting these citations at the end of the paragraph, let's say. You're doing them at the end of the sentence that has information in it. And finally, at the end of your document, you're going to have an entire works cited page. So it's just what I was saying before. Whatever it is your citations, in-text citations, that's at the end of a sentence, is going to be in parentheses with a page number. Notice no comma and no P for page number. There's also no periods in there. When it's possible to naturally do it, you're going to introduce it. We saw examples of this before, but see how we're saying Jonathan Brown. If we bring up the author's name here prior to our quote, we don't actually need to even say Brown 2. We can just say 2 for the page number, and that's fine. Notice that the period goes after the parentheses. The citation is within the sentence still. Very important. Okay, like I said before, Purdue OWL has some great stuff there. There's a link there for you. And you have long versus short quotations. So a short quotation is maybe a sentence, something like that. Less than 4 typed lines is the official length. But usually you're going to have a sentence. You're going to do it exactly how we said before. Author's last name, page number, period, all at the end. Long quotes do something called block quotations, where they're offset. So you see that all of this right here is a quotation, all of that. And because it's so long, it's indented. See how we have our sentence here and then everything after is nice and indented. That is called a block quotation. finally, you're going to still have the citation at the end of it. It's right there. Notice that we are putting the source also before it. Because this is an editorial, it's going to be in quotation marks. If it were a book, it would be in italics. There's other things that commonly come up. What if there's more than one author? You're going to put both last names plus an and. What if there's a bunch of authors? You end up putting a couple of them, and then there is something called like et al., where it just basically says that there's more than that. Notice that the names are in alphabetical order. Grossman comes before Shapiro. What happens if there's no page numbers, like maybe a website or something? You're just going to use the author's last name. What if you don't know the author's last name? You're going to use the title of the work. And then what about it's a quote within a quote? Well, you say that it's quoted. It's a good idea not to do these. It's a much, much better idea to find the original source anyway. But if you can't, if you have to, you can cite it this way. So, like I said, at the end of your essay, you then make a works cited page. And let's look at what those look like. So entries are going to vary based on where you got your information from. So academic journals, magazines, and newspapers. You're going to have things like the volume or issue number there, as well as the pages. Online journals, a little bit different. It varies whether they want a link or not. A lot of times it's going to be a simplified or shortened link. It just kind of varies. Magazines are kind of the same way. Notice you have the publication, the dates, very important. Okay, newspapers, more of the same. Books are a little bit different because it depends on whether it's part of like an anthology or an essay versus just a book in itself. Books tend to be a little more simple. You see that you just have the author, the book title, the publisher, and the date of publication. Nice, clean. If you have more than one author, you're going to list them. Notice that they're in alphabetical order typically. There can be exceptions to this. You're going by what the book provides. But if it doesn't provide anything, you are going to, in terms of order, let's say you are going to use alphabetical. This is what I was referring to before, where you have three or more. You can use et al., which means and others in Latin. Okay, two or more books from the same author. This has a very specific way of doing it. Honestly, if you cited it with the author's last name in both, Eggers Dave, no one's really going to say anything about it. But technically, this is how you would do it. There's a few more examples there. Internet sources. Used to, this was a rarity on your works cited page. Now it seems like it's one of the more common ones. Notice that you need some information that can be very hard to find. Sometimes there's not a name of an author. Sometimes there's not a title to a site. Sometimes there's not a sponsor or publisher. Sometimes there's no date of publication there. So you have to use the date you access the source. Sometimes the web address is super long. There are ways around a lot of this stuff. So if you have a nice, clean online example, like from the Washington Post, it comes out this way. If you have a nice, clean website, it comes out that way. But you see this one is a little bit weirder down here because it's someone's personal website. You pretty much have to do your best with online sources or website sources. It's messy to use them. Something you should be asking though is if a lot of this information is missing, like you can't find it, then was the source worth using in the first place? What made the source reputable or believable in the first place? When you are putting all of your citations together in a works cited page, it's going to be on a fresh page in your paper after the end, and it's going to have a header of works cited. You're going to double space the list. It's going to be in hanging indentation. It's going to be a little bit different. And they're going to be in alphabetical based on the author's last name. Okay, so there is an example. Purdue OWL is the place to go for examples, by the way. So here's a nice MLA style paper, and then here's our works cited, something that would be there. Notice that this actually has an extra space in it. It shouldn't have this underneath the title for MLA. But notice that these are in alphabetical order, J, M, P, and R, and we have our citations there. And you can see the hanging indent where it starts not indented, and then anything after it ends up indented. APA you may see in your science classes. So your English classes are going to use MLA, but APA is a little bit different. It uses in-text citations as well, and you're going to briefly mention stuff, but it's a little bit different. So you can see here it looks slightly different, and there are a few different rules for it. Purdue OWL also does a good job on APA. There's a lot of stuff out there for it. You see, it's very similar to MLA. It's just slightly different. There's something called Chicago style as well. It's still kind of similar, but different in some ways, shapes, or forms. Notice that you end up with slightly different information. See, there's commas, there's a P, there's a period. None of that stuff you're supposed to use in MLA, but in APA you would. I'm not really going to go through this too in depth. I think you can on your own. For your English classes, it's going to be MLA. For your science classes, it tends to be APA or Chicago. It will just vary. Sometimes you'll have a professor that just prefers something else. Like, I could make you do APA if I wanted to in this class, or Chicago. But typically, English uses MLA. It works best for English. Whereas different disciplines like science, they use citations very differently. They may want footnotes, and that's where things like Chicago can come into play. Okay, so just like MLA, Purdue OWL has some great examples, as well as giving you the breakdown of what you'd be looking for APA. You have a reference list, which is very similar to a works cited page. Very similar. Just formatted slightly differently. The big thing is that you just document anything that's not yours. And you know, oh, what format is this supposed to be in? And so you do that accordingly. That is pretty much it. Your big takeaways for this should be anything that's not yours has to be documented. Try to document the best you can. And always refer to external resources. Like, for example, I have written many a paper in my life. Do I have all the little details of citation for MLA embedded into my soul? I don't. I know generally what they should be, because the more you use it, the more you learn. But I use all of the reference material out there to make sure that I'm doing a good job. And I can refer to things like a librarian or Purdue OWL or an MLA handbook to ensure that I have everything correct. This is going to be so important to you in almost every one of your college classes, Because anytime you do any writing, you're going to be using citations in some way, shape, or form. Be on the lookout for your last few assignments. Don't think that this is just the end. But hopefully this has helped you. And I look forward to you finishing up the class. So thank you.